All right, real quick, I want to talk about some issues with measuring overall price levels. Um, so we talked about earlier when we calculate CPI, we kind of have this basket that we keep stable. You know, we have to look at the same goods over a period of time because the only thing we want to change is the prices, because that's what we're measuring, is the change in prices. But this is going to lead to some problems. One problem is something called substitution bias. Now, I want you to imagine that something becomes very expensive, like for example gas or something else, but there is a substitute available, and so you go, okay, well, I was going to buy this thing, but it became really expensive, so instead I'm going to buy this. So the cost of living has not really been altered dramatically because you just had to go from buying this expensive thing to buying this cheaper alternative. But CPI doesn't see that. It sees that you're buying this super expensive thing because it keeps the basket the same. So this is going to overstate price levels if there's no adjustments made. Another thing that's tricky is the introduction of new items. So for example, how much do you think that my family growing up spent on the internet in the the late 80s, early 90s? $0, because we didn't have the internet. I mean, it existed, but not for us. We didn't buy internet because it wasn't readily available. Okay, but now paying for internet is kind of a regular thing that we all do. We pay for internet on our phones, and we pay for internet at our homes. And that's not something that existed before. So how do we handle that if that's something that's not in the basket? And that's a tricky question that the folks who measure CPI have to deal with. There's also quality changes. So, for example, I was talking about cell phones a second ago. Were there cell phones in the 80s? Yes, there were. They were about this big. Okay, they were these huge, like brick-looking things. Okay, massive batteries, and didn't have long battery life. You couldn't text. You couldn't, play a game. Very different than the products that we have now. So even if the prices stayed the same, that is not really true. That would mean that really prices had gone down because you're getting more than what you were getting before. It's really kind of comparing apples to oranges. So it's very tricky for the CPI to handle these quality changes because really we're dealing with a different item than we were in the beginning. Same thing with other things like cars. Cars now get better gas mileage, have better safety, all sorts of stuff that make them really a better object than that same object was several years ago. So if we're not careful, this is going to make prices look like they're increasing, even though it's actually the quality that's increasing and we're paying more for that quality. Okay, so these are some problems that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has to kind of iron out.